Okay, so now we've moved into the Mannerist period, and before I start, I'd like to try and explain the basic idea that's happening here with a large portion of the art. Once a year, I go to participate in something called Portfolio Day, and essentially I look at portfolios, artwork by high school students, seniors, juniors, younger sometimes. And typically, if they like to draw, I'll ask them to show me their drawings, and what I see is not really original stuff, but rather copies of their favorite artists. And I'll say, well, have you ever made any art from your own ideas, not from someone else's? And they go, yeah. And I ask to see it, and they show it to me, and I think, wow, this looks exactly like your favorite artist. So, in a way, they're learning, but they're kind of falling back on what they know and what they really like. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not the most productive. And so, of course, I tell them, go on home, draw from life, do this, do that, and hopefully in the next year or whenever they start improving. Now, politics and the world aside, we see this happening with the art of this period. Rather than studying the great masters, rather than studying life, rather than, looking at life and looking at fabric and drawing and drawing and drawing, these artists are copying and studying from the great masters that just happened. Those local boys that did good and made it big. They're looking at Leonardo, they're looking at Raphael, and they're looking at Michelangelo, and they're not giving as much attention to proportion. So on the one hand, there's that kind of idol worship that's not quite as well studied. On the second, or on the other hand, there's also this idea of, well, that was cool and beautiful, but now we want something more stylish. And that's what mannerism comes from, Manera. So this is what you might call the stylish style. Stylish overload. Which is why the bodies are out of proportion, which is why, you have more asymmetrical, excited compositions. Everything's kind of busy and full. Whereas before you had, in the Renaissance, in the High Renaissance, at least in Italy, you had symmetry, order, grace, and beauty, a sublime beauty. Here, you have something else. More so, you remember that the artists of this time, more than anything, they were not inspired by some romantic notion that I have to paint or I have to do this. They were business people. They were short order cooks. You want money? You want art? Pay me. What do you want? Well, so someone comes in and says, I want the Madonna and Child, but I want it looking classy, so, put some Greek columns in there and, but show a little skin because I want it looking cool and all, but, make it look classy. And, you know what I'm saying? You've got art a la carte. There's no reason other than the person wanted it back there to have this old man with a scroll, which is a reference to the Old Testament, or these Greek columns that go to nowhere other than referencing the classical order. It is in Parmigiano's Madonna of the Long Neck that we get the early great example of that serpentinata, that serpentine style body that's, over elongated, made more elegant, and really taking that idea of contrapposto, counterposture, and dialing it up to 11. This does not look like a painting you would see in a church, right? This is a painting that would go in someone's private home. It's not just the church that's having the art made anymore, because remember those 3 C's. You've got crown, art made for royalty. You've got the cross, art made solely for the church, and then you got the coin. People with coin, all of those merchants. It's the early 1500s, so what's happened at this point? 1492, they've discovered America, people are making all kinds of money off of the gold, coffee, and things brought from the new lands. they are wanting to spend it. And so, with that knowledge, with that money, with that extravagance, you have something like this. You have something like Venus, Cupid, Folly, and Time. This certainly does not look like a painting that you'd see in a church, but it does look like something that, is loosely based on those classical Greek or Roman ideas. And when you look at Time, the old man on the top right, you ask yourself, is Time concealing what's happening, or is he revealing? And since when would Cupid kiss and greet his mother in such a way? So there are a lot of things happening, not just the fact that, these particular people are there, but what they are doing. If you read the chapter, you would know that there are more than just these four people here. There's envy. There are other things, and what's with the masks? What do the masks mean? Why are there doves? All of these things have been carefully put in there, either because the client wanted it to be there, or because the client indicated that they wanted, these particular elements, something in this manner, in this style, to appear. And so Bronzino paints it. There you go. You could look deeper and ask yourself, why is this person here, and why do they have a serpentine tail, a leonine leg? What is the importance of the stinger and the box of chocolates or the seed that they're holding? So many things happening here. And this is very different from what we saw before. So, and by that I mean what we saw in the Renaissance. So again, we have that idea of the pendulum swinging back and forth. From here on until the end of the class, you're going to see each movement in a way, in a large way most of the time, reacting against what came before, trying to create something new, trying to, forge ahead to that next style. And so far what we've looked at are paintings by men, and now we're getting to see more paintings by women. Here we have Sofonisba Anguissola, and we're actually really lucky because a couple of hours away over in Memphis we have some examples of her work. So you can go to the Brooks, you can see some very small, very intimate kind of portraits that she painted. You can see that her work is very different because she's not trying to create this kind of salacious, titillating content. It's not overboard, it's not stylized, it's very calm, it's very straightforward. This somber portrait of the artist's sister. And we wouldn't know about artists like this if not for the works of Vasari and one or two other people writing about the artists of the time and recognizing, saying that women were just as talented as men. They could make art just as great, or that they were, if not greater than, but equal to or worthy of attention, worthy of the respect that was due them. Moving on to sculpture, we again see that, gaudiness that will begin to develop to a Baroque gaudiness. That's kind of a nod to a future chapter and period. The use of gold, going back to more decorative elements that we associate more with the Byzantine period. As well, you need to understand that we're not just focusing in Florence now, but in different parts of Italy and those influences of the regions. I talk about energy and movement and expression, and it may not be seen so much here. Obviously, there's the overload of figures, and there's so much going on. But if you want to look at movement, really the best example is Giambologna's Mercury. Here, the north wind, or one of the zephyrs, blows Mercury to his point, and his body kind of springs up. What brings it back? Now, just to get us thinking about looking at art and thinking about how the art is designed, let's take a moment to think. Does your eye just shoot completely off the page, or does something bring you back into it? And I'm willing to say that it's the finger, it's the thumb. Those little things bring us back into the piece, which, we look down at the staff, We maybe look at the diagonal line of the foot to the arm, or we look at this kind of contrast or this intersection between these two major lines. If you remember, or rather, if you don't remember, diagonal lines create tension, and there's not a single true vertical line in this. Everything is diagonal, everything is kind of off balance or playing with that idea of movement to help, accentuate the gesture of Mercury, making him light as a feather, making him fleet of foot, making him aloft. So, we've got all of these things happening in the world, politics, military turmoil, the expansion of empires, and the ever-increasing smallness of the world, whereas once it was this big thing, now things are, being discovered, the world's being made smaller, and there is, this pesky German guy named Luther, who nails his theses to a door, creating the Reformation. Going against the church. Now, the church doesn't sit on its laurels and just let them do their thing. They established a counter-reformation, trying to root out this German corruption. Where you see, they associated these bad things with Germans, which is why, and I'm going to make this image a little bigger, easier to see. There we go. So, the artist here painted this with modern clothing. Let's say I decided to paint The Last Supper in a modern setting. Well, instead of putting it in, instead of dressing them like the Renaissance, I would put them in a sports bar or put them in a restaurant. Like maybe they're all meeting at Cracker Barrel, or maybe they're meeting at TGI Fridays, and Christ is like, all right, y'all, let's get over on this one side for a picture and get a picture taken. Boom. And instead of a bag of gold, Judas is holding his cell phone. Maybe he's texting. So here, Veronese has painted these figures in contemporary clothing of the time. Not so much the classical ancient dress of yesterday, but rather trying to give them more contemporary fashions. And those contemporary fashions are German in nature. The soldiers, the men-at-arms, the people standing around, they're wearing very German fashions. And so when the church sees this, they ask him, why on earth would you associate Christ with Germans? This is madness. This is lunacy. And Veronese, fearing for his life, quite literally, the Inquisition was not something to take lightly. He said, oh, no, these aren't Germans. This is Christ in the house of Levi. He's trying to convert these people. To which the Council of Trent, to which the Inquisition finally says, okay, fine. And thus, the Last Supper was renamed Christ in the House of Levi. And the Inquisition, that's a whole other thing, a whole other class. But they helped to establish the new brand, the new way Christianity would be depicted. We've looked at a couple of chapters in how the visual language of Christianity was established. They had clear icons, clear symbols with easy to discern meanings. And now, because the church has been challenged and rebelled against, they need to reestablish their brand to bring the flock back, so to speak. So rather than flat out spelling it out for them, they want to use their art to help express some of those ideas. The art, as part of the Counter-Reformation, is not so high-minded, not so complex. And the easiest way to associate this is, say, with movie trailers. If you watch a movie trailer for Transformers, you're going to see the whole movie in 3 minutes. You don't even need to see the movie. You see the high points, boom, ba-boom, ba-boom, the big battles, and there it is. There's really no even reason to see the movie, because you see it all there. Whereas if you look up the trailer for a film like Super 8 by J.J. Abrams, the trailer for Super 8 is mysterious, it is elusive, and it's kind of like, what did I just watch? And some people are like, I don't know what I just watched, but I'm kind of curious about it. I want to see more. That's not to say that one is bad, one is better than the other. personal taste will tell you what that is, but for now it's apples and oranges. Here in the Counter-Reformation, the artwork was direct. It spelled things out for you. Whereas before we had the complexity of Leonardo's Last Supper, here in this one we have the light of the Lord, we have the angels coming down, we have Judas, and everyone clearly indicated. And where is Judas in Tintoretto's Last Supper? Well, is he one of the servants? Is he over here, like he's not part of the group, but he still gets to eat? No. Is he the servant here, kind of like not sitting at the table? No. If you look here, you'll see that each of the apostles has their light, their grace. But if you take a look, there's one person that's part of the table, but is not illuminated by their own natural grace, and that person is Judas. As well, he's on the other side of the table. He's engaged with them, but he is also apart. So, easy to understand. The light of the Lord is there. The light is reflected in the greatest halo around Christ himself. The angels bless the scene, and we have a very expressive, but still direct, in-your-face, kind of emotional image. Now, of the countries, Germany and the North, they were affected by the Reformation the most, whereas Italy and Spain clung strongly to the church and stayed with the Catholic Church. And one of the great artists of the Counter-Reformation would be El Greco of Spain, the Greek of Spain. And here he paints the burial of Count Orgaz. And what we see here is a combination of the Counter-Reformation aesthetic with all of those things that we've been looking at in the Mannerist period. You've got this very busy composition, full of energy. It's asymmetrical. It's got these elongated, very stylized bodies, but it also has that clear Christian message, laying everything out. Count Orgaz is being lain down before all of these witnesses. Yeah, the gold is connected up here and reflected here, and the spirit of Orgaz is presented, or is introducing himself to Mary and St. Peter as he is about to be judged. Now, for all of this scene, there's one real striking element if you take a little more time to look, and that is the little boy. The little boy who stands there looking at you and pointing his finger to Orgaz, almost as if to say, "Where will you go?" or "Look upon Orgaz." Taking the place of the viewer is the priest himself, the only person in the picture with his back to us. We could say Orgaz is not quite his back to us, it's like his side, so the priest here bears witness to this scene as if seeing both. And just like in Renaissance art, in the High Renaissance, we see this kind of split, the horizon line. Everything below the horizon line is the world of man, things of earth, and things above the horizon line would be the heavens. And breaching that border is the cross, which leads us back to the priest, which looks up. Again, there's this strong triangular kind of setup. Not used as cleverly or as much as in other pieces, but there is a triangular element there to be seen, which again refers back to the Trinity. So a certain artist of note for the Counter-Reformation, of course, would be Veronese, Tintoretto, and El Greco. Meanwhile, our last section, architecture. Now, because architecture was not really inventing anything new, they were still looking to the classics. What did they do? They took their favorite styles and they remixed them. They combined them. And one writer that we know about this trend is Palladio. Palladio, who combined those different elements, would later write this book called this tome called The Four Books on Architecture, which would help to influence Thomas Jefferson, who would go on and design a few important buildings and make quite a splash in the United States or the colonies. So what did he do? He combined that Greek front and remixed it by, okay, look at the diagram. Typically, the Greek building, if we think about the Parthenon, it would have the pedestal and columns all around. It would have the one entrance and the steps right up to it. Now, we don't have that here. We have something more like a Roman building with that one main entrance. But here he has put it on all four sides. It's like, yo, dog, I heard you like those palatial entrances. Well, I got 4 of them for you now, son. And when you look at this, you can see the combinations of Roman Greek influence and the majesty of that great entrance, the heavy columns, and are those Doric, Ionic, or Corinthian capitals. If you look really closely, what exactly are those? For a sense of scale, there's a small European car, but there's just a better picture of it, I think. And yeah, what? Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I had to start over. What else has happened here is not necessarily innovative in that they've created a brand new style, but they've combined these things and adapted them for the place. And our last building to look at here is in Venice, where land is always at quite a premium. There's not much of it, right? So typically, the Roman style or the Greek style building would, here's the main building, that box, and things would project out. The atrium, all of those steps, all of those things would come forward from the main building itself. Well, in Italy, that's not much of an option. Here's the front of the building, and here's that main entrance, that atrium. It has been smushed, very technical word there, it's been smushed up against the wall itself to help you see, to help fit that land, what little of it there is. And so now, rather than having freestanding columns, the columns have become engaged, part of that front facade, to fit the water, to fit the land that's there before it sinks into the water. So not so much a remix, but just some real innovative, engineering, design in that respect. San Giorgio Maggiore. In the PowerPoint, there's a blank slide here. Don't worry about that. But I've gone pretty quickly through this. These are the key points for this chapter. Understanding the consequence of Veronese's trial, understanding the influence of the Inquisition as well as the Counter-Reformation, understanding what the Counter-Reformation was about. We'll look at a little more in depth at the Reformation when we move to the north. But that's it. This is my quick run through the manners chapter. These are probably the most important images for the chapter. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask by email, through the forum, call my office, or leave a message in Blackboard. Thanks a lot. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in class.